Pragmatics is a branch of linguistics that focuses on language and the context in which language is used. It also focuses on the purpose behind communication, the speaker's intention when using spoken language or sign language. In this video, we are going to describe and analyze a branch of linguistics known as pragmatics, identify different parts of communication, identify 6 aspects of pragmatics, and describe those 6 aspects. But first, what is effective communication? Effective communication is the why behind the construction of a message. It is the reason or goal behind the message we want to communicate. A requirement for effective communication is having a purpose, a reason behind the statement being made. For interpreters, understanding intention is critical because intention influences every interpretation choice we make. Communication is a way for us to connect with people and with the world. It is also a way to acquire information. When we receive a message, what do we do in order to understand it? We decode it. We receive the message and decode it in order to understand its meaning. However, mistakes can happen during the decoding process. But how do we send our own message? When we construct a message that we want to communicate to another person, we must encode it. We place our thoughts into a code. Then we send the message. Sending the message may involve speaking or using sign language. The other person receives the information and must decode it in order to understand our message. Communication includes 6 parts: pragmatics, the intention of the message; kinesics, nonverbal communication; performance, the act of communicating; social context, grammar and semantics; and proxemics, the use of space. Remember that interpreters use the entire context of communication in order to understand a message, decode it, construct a new message, and produce an interpretation. Communication is not only about the words we choose. What matters is also the way we communicate. In English, there's a common expression: it's not what you say, but how you say it. What is the intention behind the message? What reason does the speaker have behind the communication? Communication in action is often imprecise because of the human element. There is no guarantee that the receiver will decode the message in a way that perfectly matches the speaker's original intention. Effective communicators try to achieve their goals in ways that maintain or improve relationships between participants. Kinesics, the nonverbal aspects of communication, include facial expressions, gestures, body posture, and vocal tone. Many of these messages are communicated unconsciously. Performance is simply the act of speaking or the act of signing. Social context includes several aspects, including physical location, participant status, personal history, and noise. To better understand these aspects, let's imagine a conference setting. For example, imagine interpreting at a conference. Everyone attending the conference is a professional. People communicate differently in that professional setting than they would with friends at home or during a personal medical appointment. The location a person is in affects how they communicate. Participant status refers to who is who within a communication setting. For example, a presenter communicates differently with participants than a volunteer, student, or attendee communicates with the presenter. Think about a teacher, a religious leader, or a doctor. People often communicate differently when they perceive another person as having a different level of authority or status. For example, when I attend a workshop as a participant, I feel different than when I present professionally. I also communicate differently with close friends than I do in professional settings. For personal history, this refers to the relationship and shared experiences between participants. For example, imagine a presenter at a conference recognizes someone they have known for 15 or 20 years. That presenter may communicate differently with that person than with other participants. Personal history may involve friendship, professional conflict, mentorship, or previous experiences. All of those factors influence communication choices. In this context, noise does not only refer to sound. Noise includes anything that distracts participants from communication. For example, strong smells, someone entering the room unexpectedly, personal thoughts, stress, or environmental distractions. Anything that interferes with communication may be considered noise. Grammar and semantics are quite simply the rules in language. A language must have rules that people generally agree upon and follow in order for communication to be effective. In fact, we often need to understand the rules before we can intentionally break them to create humor, jokes, sarcasm, or storytelling. The way we use language helps us make sense of the messages we send and receive. Grammar and semantics focus on those rules within the language. Proxemics refers to how we use space during communication. Think about a person telling a secret. They often move closer. Think about someone asking for a favor discreetly. They may step aside or reduce physical distance. Or think about a parent disciplining a child. The use of space changes depending on the communication situation. Let's clarify a little further. Semantics focuses on analyzing the meaning of words, phrases, and sentences without considering context, speaker intention, or external factors. Pragmatics studies the intended meaning of the speaker and the meaning inferred by the listener. Quite simply put, semantics focuses on the language itself, while pragmatics focuses on the full context surrounding communication. Pragmatics is a general functional perspective on language or any aspect of language. That is an approach to language that takes into account the full complexity of its cognitive, social, and cultural functioning. In other words, how language creates meaning in human life. Why is pragmatics important for professional interpreters? Why should we study pragmatics? Studying pragmatics helps interpreters understand implied meaning. It also helps interpreters understand jokes, idiomatic expressions, sarcasm, cultural references, and social interaction. Imagine you are on a bus and suddenly realize an older man is stepping on your foot. What would you say? Sir, please stop stepping on my foot. You're stepping on me. Could you move your foot, please? Sir, you're stepping on my foot. Would you mind stepping back a little? These can vary additionally with, excuse me, could you move your foot, please? Or even, hey, you're stepping on me. Notice that the words we choose change the meaning and the tone of the interaction. Grammar, semantics, tone of voice, facial expressions, and even the use of physical space all influence communication. Understanding the context of a message, who is communicating, where the interaction occurs, and what the attention is influences interpretation decisions. Understanding pragmatics requires both understanding the social aspects of communication and understanding the cognitive aspects of language acquisition and language use. It is not enough to simply understand a language. We must also understand culture. When linguistic and cultural competence are missing, the speaker may misunderstand thoughts or emotions, struggle with facial expressions and tone, misunderstand humor or sarcasm, fail to understand or recognize social cues, or appear awkward, rude, or insensitive. Here's an example of asking for water. In English, a person may say, can I have a glass of water? However, communication patterns differ across cultures. Every language and culture has its own preferred ways of making requests. In Spanish, you wouldn't say, can I have directly and say, ¿Puedo tener un vaso de agua? It just doesn't work. Every language and culture has its own preferred ways of making requests. Pragmatics helps us understand not only vocabulary and grammar, but also what sounds natural and socially appropriate within a culture. Without understanding pragmatics, a person may technically speak the language correctly while still sounding unnatural or socially inappropriate. For interpreters, this matters because interpretation is not only about translating words, it's about communicating meaning appropriately. Every speech act can be expressed differently depending on social context. Imagine a student asking for a signature on a form to a friend. Hey, sign this for me. To a parent, mother, father, guardian. Can you sign this for me? To a professor or teacher. Could you please sign this for me? To the university director. Would you please be so kind as to sign this form for me? The final example may sound more formal or even exaggerated, but it demonstrates an important point. We communicate differently depending on who we are speaking to, social status, location, relationship, proxemics, kinesics, grammar, and semantics. All of those elements influence communication. Remember, interpreters use the entire context of communication in order to understand meaning and produce an accurate interpretation. Pragmatics helps us move beyond words and understand human communication more completely. Here's a practice and reflection activity. Imagine you are giving advice to a teenager you care about. It could be any topic that could involve alcohol or drug use, relationships, school, higher education, career choices, safety, or life decisions in general. How does your language change when you advise versus warn, prohibit, or persuade? What changes? Tone, word choice, force, and intention.